Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Poetry Thursday, and I wanted to talk about some interesting poetry that I found. Because I haven't really been able to read as much poetry because I've been busy in my job lately. But here I am now, ready to talk about poetry. And today's poem is about the civil rights movement, so maybe not as unusual, but its structure and its focus might be a bit unusual. I am referring to Rosa Parks by Nikki Giovanni. For those who don't know, Nikki Giovanni is a black poet who was born in the 1940s, and she is still alive today as of when I am recording this video. She is known for writing about the black experience and civil rights. She has written poetry, but also stories for children, and she's put her poetry on disc as well. And as a result of all of this, she's been celebrated in the black community, having received recognition from Oprah, but also an NAACP Image Award, which is pretty fancy and impressive. That's about what to expect from her poetry. As I was reading some of her poetry lately, I noticed that it doesn't necessarily follow the style that you would expect of poets. The verse format, whereas hers is kind of a blend of poetry and prose. I'm always willing to talk about stuff that doesn't conform to the traditional style on this channel. So without further ado, let's talk about Rosa Parks, the poem. I will read it, do a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. Rosa Parks. This is for the Pullman porters who organized when people said they couldn't, and carried the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender to the black Americans in the South so they would know they were not alone. This is for the Pullman porters who helped Thurgood Marshall go south and come back north to fight the fight that resulted in Brown v. Board of Education, because even though Kansas is west, and even though Topeka is the birthplace of Gwendolyn Brooks, who wrote the powerful The Chicago Defender Sends a Man to Little Rock, it was the Pullman porters who whispered to the traveling men, both the blues men and the race men, so that they both would know what was going on. This is for the Pullman porters who smiled as if they were happy and laughed like they were tickled when some folks were around, and who silently rejoiced in 1954 when the Supreme Court announced its 9-0 decision that separate is inherently unequal. This is for the Pullman porters who smiled and welcomed a 14-year-old boy onto their train in 1955. They noticed his slight limp that he tried to disguise with the doo-wop walk. They noticed his stutter and probably understood why his mother wanted him out of Chicago during the summer when school was out. 14-year-old black boys with limps and stutters are apt to try to prove themselves in dangerous ways when mothers aren't around to look after them. So this is for the Pullman porters who looked over that 14-year-old while the train rolled the reverse of the blues highway from Chicago to St. Louis to Memphis to Mississippi. This is for the men who kept him safe. And if Emmett Till had been able to stay on a train all summer, he would have maybe grown a bit of a paunch, certainly lost his hair, probably have worn bifocals, and bounced his grandchildren on his knees, telling them about his summer riding the rails. But he had to get off the train and ended up in Money, Mississippi, and he was horribly, brutally, inexcusably, and unacceptably murdered. This is for the Pullman porters who, when the sheriff was trying to get the body secretly buried, got Emmett's body on the northbound train, got his body home to Chicago, where his mother said, "I want the world to see what they did to my boy." And this is for all the mothers who cried, and this is for all the people who said never again. And this is about Rosa Parks, whose feet were not so tired. It had been, after all, an ordinary day until the bus driver gave her the opportunity to make history. This is about Mrs. Rosa Parks from Tuskegee, Alabama, who was also the field secretary of the NAACP. This is about the moment Rosa Parks shouldered her cross, put her worldly goods aside, was willing to sacrifice her life so that the young man in Money, Mississippi, who had been so well protected by the Pullman porters, would not have died in vain. When Mrs. Parks said no, a passionate movement was begun. No longer would there be a reliance on the law. There was a higher law. When Mrs. Parks brought the light of hers to expose the evil of the system, the sun came and rested on her shoulders, bringing the heat and the light of truth. Others would follow Mrs. Parks. 4 young men in Greensboro, North Carolina, would also say no. Great voices would be raised, singing the praises of God and exhorting us to forgive those who trespass against us. But it was the Pullman porters who safely got Emmett to his granduncle, and it was Mrs. Rosa Parks who could not stand that death, and in not being able to stand it, she sat back down. And so that was Rosa Parks by Nikki Giovanni. A pretty interesting, and what I'm going to say is probably one of my new favorite sort of civil rights era poems, where it's pretty clear what Nikki Giovanni is talking about in this poem. She's talking about various figures in the civil rights movement and what they did or what they sacrificed or what they lost because of the injustices that Black Americans face in the United States. She talks about Thurgood Marshall, who fought in Brown v. Board of Education and managed to get it so that segregation was defeated. She talks about Emmett Till, who was lynched allegedly by someone who lied. And during that time, a lot of white women lied about their encounters with Black American males because that was the social thing to do, and that ended up getting those Black American males killed, and that's what happened to Emmett Till. They also talk about a young man with a doo-wop walk. I don't exactly know who she's referring to, but it's probably a famous musician of some sort. And she also talks about Rosa Parks. But I think what's hidden beneath this poem, and it's very clear, but what's hidden beneath it is how these figures might be the most famous, but they didn't necessarily do the most work. She talks about the Pullman porters, who managed to get Emmett Till's body on the train and take it back to his mother. And they also talk about protecting the boy with the doo-wop walk. They talk about making sure Thurgood Marshall had everything he needed to get to and from Kansas and whatnot. So although like Thurgood Marshall and these larger-than-life figures are often talked about, the accomplishments of those who did the groundwork are often forgotten or pushed to the side. And so what I think Nikki Giovanni is saying here is that like the work that the Pullman porters did allowed for these larger-than-life figures to get their notoriety. And so when Rosa Parks chooses to stay seated at the front of the bus rather than go back at the back of the bus, that was a staged moment. It was real, but they still chose Rosa Parks for a reason. But because she knew about all these injustices, thanks to the work of the Pullman porters, her work was able to mean more. And so I think this is all about recognizing those who have come before and those who have done a lot of the grunt work, the dirty work, that often doesn't get celebrated. And so I think that's why I really like this poem, because of the power and the emotion she gives to the Pullman porters, who probably I hadn't heard of these people before. They're probably not all a large known group, but their work is celebrated because they helped make a large part of the civil rights movement function. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Rosa Parks by Nikki Giovanni. It's a poem I definitely recommend that you go out and read, not just for Black History Month, but outside as well, so that we can amplify Black voices and understand the true history of what has happened in America. So yeah, if you read this before or you simply want to comment on something I've said, do so below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this poem as well as Poetry Thursday in general. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and train-like travels. Farewell.